Welcome back, guys, to Empire Prince. Today I got another Star Wars helmet for you guys. We are doing the Imperial Remnant Snowtrooper helmet, the one without the face covering in the trailer. And this file is from ChrisThePropGuy over on Etsy. You should go check out his files. Stuff is really good. And this was kind of the first one that came up. And I haven't used his files before, but it's really well split up. You have all the detail pieces right here. If we can focus right here, we have all the detail pieces that go into here. Gotta focus. There we go. So you have 3 that go here for these little aerators or whatever they're called. And then these pieces go on the sides. That's the wrong side. Right here like that. Makes it easier for painting or sanding, whichever you're trying to do. I just had to print the dome in 2 parts, so I had to cut it right here and then printed everything else like such. And I printed all this on my Bamboo Lab P1S in PLA, and we're ready to get started sanding. Here is a clip of the face mask straight off the printer. Just wanted to show you guys how I orientated it right there. And then the dome, I just pretty much flipped it upside down and then printed the dome without any supports. You can print it without supports. I've always been super nervous to print without supports in that center because I never want it to fail, and they can take a while, and I don't want to waste filament, but trust me, it will hold itself up. You'll have a little stringing on the inside, but it's going to save you so much time and so much filament. After everything's printed, I come in with a 220 grit, and I just hand sand the whole thing. This is a helmet where I should have used the mouse sander, at least on this dome part. It's super flat. There's not really any details, and it would have saved me a lot of effort, but I really like the control of hand sanding, and I gotta get a new mouse sander because it would definitely come in handy on helmets like this. But you just want to sand down as much as you can, kind of just destroy those layer lines before we put any sort of fillers on our helmet. So the first thing I wanted to tackle for this helmet was that nasty seam line. I'm using something different today. I'm using some Bondo original filler. This is different than the Bondo spot putty. This is where you mix in that hardener, and you have 5 minutes to set this on where you want it to before it's completely hardened or at least unworkable. But it takes about an hour or 2 to harden up before you can start sanding it. This stuff can be a pain to work with, and it's a little hard to apply sometimes. But for doing seam line work, this is kind of what you want to be using. It's an auto body filler. It is very thick and it dries super hard. Bondo spot putty is really great for kind of spot areas, but when it comes to the seam line, I've had so many issues with Bondo where it just takes layer after layer after layer to fill in those seam lines. And on top of that, I've had it crack before, and that makes all that work pretty much pointless. It sucks when it happens, but use this stuff. It worked really well for me. It's kind of a one and done. You only have to do it once, and then I just come in with Bondo spot putty and touch up any areas I missed. So here's where I made the first mistake of this helmet. I'm so mad I did this, but I decided to super glue all of the detail pieces onto the face mask / helmet part, and this was a bad idea because all these parts are either silver or chrome. So I had to go back and tape all these off later, and it was hard to chrome some of them. It's not fun. Leave these separate until you're done painting the rest of the mask, and you can just glue them on later. It's getting to save yourself so much time. After everything's been glued in, I went in with some Bondo glazing and spot putty and mixed it with some acetone. I go for a very watery mixture. I like it very thin and not too thick. You don't need a super thick consistency unless you have a really rough print or a rougher spot where it's just going to need a thicker layer. But I build this up in layers anyways, so having it very much watered down makes it a lot easier to work with and dries almost instantly. It dries very quickly. But this is such a cheat code because it pretty much fills in all your layer lines, and after this it's just filling in those rougher spots and getting it nice and smooth for painting. Depending on temperature, for me, it was about 30 minutes. This stuff was dry and ready to be wet sanded. I'm coming in with a 400 grit sandpaper, and we're just sanding it down as smooth as we can. We don't want to sand all of this Bondo off, but you can be pretty rough in the sanding process because we want to get it ready for that first layer of filler primer. And as you saw in the previous clip, I was a little bit worried to put the Bondo acetone over the Bondo original filler, but I had no weird reactions with it, no problems at all. So you're good to put that right over the Bondo Original filler. No issues at all. I'm glad I didn't, because I was a little worried that I was going to. But after that, just wet sand this down with some 400 grit, and then we can move on to our next step. So I just used some normal Rust-Oleum filler primer and put a nice thick layer over the entirety of the helmet. And then after that's dry, I'm coming in with some Bondo spot putty, and I'm just going all the rougher areas like the top of the dome and all the edges along the helmet. That is a pro tip I can give anyone. Fill all the bottom and side edges of the helmet. A lot of people tend to avoid that area, but I promise you, when you fill them and have them smooth and you're holding the helmet in your hands, this is more of an in-person kind of thing. You won't really see it on photos, but when you're holding that prop in your hands, it feels that much more realistic and professional when all those edges are nice and smooth like the rest of the helmet. After about 30 minutes to an hour, kind of depending on the temperature, this stuff is normally ready to be wet sanded. I'm just coming in with another 400 grit wet sand and doing it over the entirety of the helmet. Take your time with this step. The more layers of filler primer and spot putty and sanding you do, the more professional your prop's going to look. Trust me, put the time into sanding. It's going to be well worth it. Don't skip out on this step. You do not want to see layer lines or any iffy spots on your helmet. And I was trying to get a little bit more of a smooth finish on this helmet. We are going to be weathering it, but Imperial helmets tend to be more well kept than something like a clone helmet that might have a little bit more damage to it. So that's what I was shooting for in this helmet, just getting a nice smooth finish. Based on the screen use prop and the Hot Toys references I had, this was definitely a satin white. I did not see a super high gloss finish, so I just come in with some satin white by Rust-Oleum and did several layers. You gotta layer it up when you're using white. I always feel like I miss a spot and I have to come back later. So after I got a nice even coat, I just come in with some masking tape and tape off the top half, which is stain white, because that bottom kind of aerator section is a dark gray. Probably could have gone a little lighter on the gray, but I'm still happy with how it turned out. So once you have that taped off, we can go into the color I used. For the gray, I'm just using some Vallejo Stonewall Gray and some Vallejo Black Gray. I'm spraying this out of my airbrush. It's just a lot faster. It's more efficient. It dries super quick. I really like airbrushing. You can do a lot of cool things with painting and on your props. You can get very nice professional finishes. So I'm trying to get more comfortable with using it, and I decided to spray the gray portion with my airbrush, and then after that airbrush paint was dry, I used some Rust-Oleum matte clear coat. You want to clear coat if you're using airbrush paints on your helmet, specifically when you're using a large portion of your helmet, such as this, with just airbrush paints. This stuff is very thin. It's not as durable as spray paint, so if you don't seal it up, you're probably going to scrape it off, peel it off, especially if you put any tape over it, you will rip that airbrush paint right up. So apply a clear coat, whatever finish you're looking for. The matte clear coat was perfect in this scenario. I screwed up the audio for this original clip, so I'm now doing a voiceover for you. As you can see on your screen, this is an image of the screen-used prop of these Snowtrooper helmets, or one of the screen-used props. It's from the Mandalorian museum that Jon Favreau had set up, and it is a great reference image. It is so nice to have one of the actual movie props nice and close up so we can see all the details. And one of the details that we're going to be working on now is those side vents. They're kind of a metallic metal sheen to them, and so I'm just using some Spastics High Gloss Black and some Spastics Mirror Chrome. You can use spray paints. There's nothing wrong with using spray paints for this helmet. I'm just trying to see the difference in quality using an airbrush, and I'm trying to increase my skills with an airbrush. I'm trying to use it more, and it is really nice that this stuff dries like instantly, so you can kind of just rapid fire through the helmet and really get stuff done a lot quicker than if you're waiting for spray paint to dry for several hours or even a day. So we're going to come in and spray those vents with chrome, and then I had a couple issues with the airbrush paint scraped off before I put on that matte clear coat. So this is why we use that matte clear coat. I will say, in all honesty, this is my first time using that Spastics High Gloss Black. I don't know if I used it correctly or if it needed more layers or a heavier coat or a different PSI. Like I said, I'm very new to airbrushing. I'm still trying to get the hang of it. It is going to be a very long learning process to get this stuff exactly to where I want it to be. But I did get a nice glossy black. It wasn't perfect by any means, and I definitely got to do some more testing with this paint. But it gave me a nice gloss black to get that perfect kind of metallic metal finish to it. And then for the chrome, I just sprayed it at about 15 psi on my airbrush and just kind of dusted it over until I was happy with the correct or proper metal shine that I was looking for based on the reference images. After taping up these front three sections that are going to be black, I just used some Liquitex Carbon Black. This stuff is airbrush ready, don't have to thin it at all. And then I just gave a nice thick layer to these front three detail parts. There's definitely an easier way to tape this up. I think I used 50 different small little things to get those circles all taped up. If anyone has any recommendations for a more efficient tape job, please let me know. But after this, we can move on to the rest of the details. So this is where I made another mistake on this helmet. It is the most soul-crushing thing ever when you lift up the tape and you see your primer or the Bondo layer underneath that just pulled up that paint. I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. It is the worst thing, and it's so annoying because you can either include it in the weathering, try to cover it up with some paint, or sand it back down. And I was not sanding this thing back down after all the work we already just put into it. So all I did is I touched it up with some white paint, and I thought I could include it on the weathering. It was only a small nick on the nose, and then the big chunks on top, which were the most worrisome, those were actually covered up by the dome. So it wasn't even a big deal to begin with. I didn't even need to touch them up, but it was totally fine. Ended up getting covered up anyways, so I was very fortunate that I didn't pull it up in a spot that was going to be showing. And then this is where it would have been nice to leave these detail parts separate, because I probably would have done these Spastics and high gloss black over these parts as well, but because of where they were located, I just came in with some Vallejo silver, which still gives a super nice metallic shine, and I just hand painted these in. I took my time, went very carefully. We are weathering this helmet, so it's not a big deal if you get a little bit over, but I did my best to be careful as I was going for a very professional look to this helmet. So after attaching the two parts of the helmet together, which I will say there were no alignment pins, so I kind of had to eyeball it, which was a little difficult, and the one kind of drawback to this file is it was kind of hard to align the parts, but I got a nice perfect even finish on both sides where I glued it in, so not a worry. And then to start our airbrush weathering, I almost exclusively airbrush weathered this helmet. I did do a little dry brushing, but we'll get into that. I'm using just some black at a very low PSI, and I'm just barely pulling that trigger back, and I'm just kind of going around the crevices only on the gray portions of the helmet. The white portions we're going to be using a different color. It's okay if you go a little bit on the white, which I did to get a very natural blend in weathering, but I just came in with the airbrush and just very lightly along those crevices, around the vents and the aerators, and it started to really kind of come together and start to show somewhere, which I was very happy with. This was a very slow process, but it's a lot of fun to do. Now, to weather the rest of the helmet, we're using some Vallejo Neutral Gray and Leather Brown. I just kind of roughly mixed these two together, only a couple drops of gray, to get the color you're seeing now from the movie prop. They went a little bit more gray around the brim. I kind of used this brownish yellow color around the entirety of the helmet. I just think it fit really nicely for the Remnant Empire. It's that kind of faded yellow look that you see on a white and almost has like a dirt buildup in all the crevices. I used a very low PSI, and I just very carefully went in all the crevices and kind of nooks and crannies of the helmet, and then around the brim, and then kind of slowly blended it in some areas, just kind of randomly dusted it over the entirety of the helmet. this was a very random process. You can kind of go as heavy as you want, as little as you want, but this just gives the perfect blend and kind of faded white look that you would see on these troopers. These guys are the Remnant Empire. They're going to be dirty and less upkept than if the Empire was still up and running. So we want to get a very weathered and used look to this helmet. I spent probably about 3 to 4 hours airbrushing this helmet. I know it doesn't look like it, but I was going in between the reference photos and other images and just kind of random Imperial Remnant helmets with other weathering, and I was kind of scrolling through Instagram to see, if anybody else has done this and any tips they might have. You can come in with washes too. Whatever is gonna get the look that you're desiring out of this helmet. Now, to work on blending this helmet, I just came in with a damp paper towel, and if any spots looked a little too sharp and not as perfect as I'd like, I just kind of dabbed it away. I really wanted to blend this in to the helmet so it didn't look like somebody just sprayed dirt specifically only in this corner. I wanted to look like a faded white, a faded little build up around that brim and kind of random spots around the helmet. And here I'm just dusting that same kind of brownish color. I know it may not look like it, but I'm just kind of hovering it over the helmet, kind of at a distance, and just kind of splotting it in. This helps kind of blend in that dirt so it's not just focused in one area, but kind of built up in the corners, then maybe a little spotty on the dome area or that back kind of cover area. This is a very random process. I mean, I'm very new to this style of weathering. I normally come in with a ton of hand paints, so this style of airbrushing was very new to me, and I've never done almost exclusively airbrush weathering on this helmet, but I could not be happier with the look that I received from this. It looked so well. It looked really professional, like it came right off the movie set, and I'm very happy with how the color turned out. Now, looking close up at the screen use prop, there is some kind of metal weathering just kind of on these aerator cheek parts, just a little bit of metal weathering. It's not a ton. It's not subtle, but it's just kind of focused on this one area. So I come in first with a Vallejo gunmetal, and then I come back in with a Vallejo silver and just kind of roughly dry brush this over those kind of stick out edges. I don't really know the terminology for it, but what you're doing is you're building up that gunmetal and then that Vallejo silver so it has a more natural kind of layer to it. It's going to look much more realistic and have more depth to it. So you're just going to kind of dry brush that over those side areas and then a little bit around the nose area. You can go as heavy as you want with this or as little as you want. I was just doing my best to match the reference images. I unfortunately didn't record the part where I put in the lenses, but I only used a Hobart face shield and then just kind of cut them to size. And then I dry brushed a little bit of black over the edges, and then this helmet is all ready to be shown off. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. I am so happy with how this helmet turned out, and I learned a lot of new techniques that I can't wait to try on some other projects I have coming up. Stay tuned. I'd really appreciate you leaving a like and subscribing. It really helps support the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.